They dismissed it as noise before the third sensor sweep finished. Imperial Command watched the contact flicker at the edge of the deep-range array, a single return where nothing should have been. It held for 1.8 seconds, vanished, then reappeared. 0.4 AU closer on the same vector, unchanged. No drive flare, no wake, no transponder. The duty analyst flagged it as a ghost echo and prepared to purge the buffer. Relic artifact, an admiral said, already bored. They ran a focused scan anyway. The silhouette resolved into something blunt and inelegant, mass-heavy with no decorative geometry, no energy veins, no radiant shielding. Just layered plates and a spine that suggested projectile ports, anachronisms preserved by ignorance. The combat AI assigned a provisional threat rating of 0.02. Classification tags populated, primitive construction, incomplete emissions profile, probable autonomous probe or derelict, a sensor ghost. The phrase annotated itself on the display, not as a warning, but as a convenience. They widened the cone. No escort signatures accompanied it. No defensive net, no supporting traffic. Beyond it, the system remained empty save for routine Imperial patrols and a mainline fleet element holding at 2.1 million kilometers. Numbers mattered, and the numbers were insulting. One unidentified hull against 10,000 Imperial warships within response range. Dismiss or process? The presiding admiral asked. Process, another replied, without looking up. Make an example if it persists. The contact vanished again, this time for a full 6 seconds. When it returned, it was closer still, now well inside the outer picket, distance reduced by 0.7 AU without a detectable transit. The room stilled, irritation sharpening into curiosity. Drives did not work that way. Nothing worked that way. A junior officer suggested recalibrating the array. The suggestion was waved off. False positives multiplied under stress. That was known. The Empire had catalogued thousands of such anomalies over centuries. They were always debris, echoes, or forgotten machines from dead species that never learned to hide their emissions properly. Primitive, the scan deepened, internal volumes mapped unevenly, interrupted by voids that confused the return. Power output registered low and stubbornly flat, a line that refused to spike or pulse. The ship did not maneuver. It held vector as if space itself were irrelevant. The Empire interpreted stillness as ignorance. A compliance package queued automatically. 12 languages. Instructional tone. Timelines rendered in clean columns. Acknowledge in 180 seconds. Disarm in 360. Prepare for boarding in 600. The message was never sent. The contact vanished again, reappearing moments later on the same bearing, closer by another 0.5 AU, one contact. Agree. Annotation changed, again not as a warning. A weapons officer suggested a ranging volley to collapse the uncertainty. The presiding admiral approved a demonstration shot at 12% output, nothing lethal, just enough to force a reaction. The order propagated cleanly through the fleet. Weapons charged. Before the countdown reached 0, the contact stabilized and held. Its outline sharpened, armor seams visible, blunt and unapologetic. Still no emissions, still no response. It did not flee, it did not signal, it waited. Processing candidate, the admiral said, and the room relaxed around the decision. The Empire had rules for things that appeared without permission. They were catalogued, corrected, and forgotten. Whatever this was, probe, relic, or stubborn debris, it would learn the same lesson as the rest. Weapons reached readiness. Targeting brackets snapped into place around the unknown hull, confident and precise. The Empire prepared to erase a ghost and move on. Across the void, the unidentified ship held its course, silent and unmarked, as if the distance closing between them had been calculated long before it ever appeared. The reply arrived without preamble or deference. Imperial targeting brackets flickered as the unknown ship asserted link priority, collapsing challenge channels into a single narrow-band stream. There was no encryption flourish, no diplomatic handshake. Just a signal that worked. The visual resolved a moment later. A human command deck lit for function, not ceremony, consoles arranged for reach and redundancy. A human officer stood centered. Hands behind their back, posture relaxed to the point of insult. The Empire transmitted first, as doctrine required. The compliance message unfurled in practiced cadence. Authority cited, precedent listed, outcomes explained. Timelines rendered beneath the words 180 seconds to acknowledge, 360 to disarm, 600 to prepare for boarding. The human officer watched the data scroll, eyes moving with it, expression unchanged. Silence followed for 3 seconds. "We acknowledge." "Receipt," the human said. The voice was level, unamplified, carried on a band the Empire did not use. "Your jurisdiction does not extend to this vessel." Irritation rippled through the command amphitheater. An admiral gestured to the tactical display where the numbers were unambiguous. 1 unidentified ship, 10,000 Imperial warships within range, response time under 4 minutes. "You are in Imperial space," the admiral said. "Compliance preserves your crew." "The numbers are accurate," the human replied. "Your conclusion is not." The Empire escalated to legal framing, invoking classification protocols for unregistered craft, and the corrective necessity of processing. The human officer inclined their head a fraction. "We are not requesting passage," they said. "We are establishing a boundary. Does not apply." The phrase flagged across auxiliary systems, marked for rhetorical analysis. A countdown appeared in the human feed, ticking down from 300. The officer watched it without comment. "Yadu 40, they spoke again. "Withdraw beyond 1.5 million kilometers," they said. "Power down offensive systems. This interaction ends." "And if we refuse?" the presiding admiral asked, amusement edging the words. "Then this ceases to be an interaction," the human said, "and becomes an outcome." The Empire attempted intimidation. Visual overlays expanded, showing fleet mass, weapon readiness, projected casualty curves. The human officer did not look away. "We crossed interstellar space under our own power over 200 years ago," they said. "We are not pre-anything, and we do not submit. We do not submit." The words landed without emphasis, recorded as fact. At 180, the Empire issued its final compliance prompt, stripped of nuance by automation. The human officer waited until the last syllable rendered, then closed their eyes briefly, as if concluding a routine briefing. "We do not kill prisoners," they said. "Plan accordingly!" The channel closed. The unknown ship did not maneuver. It did not accelerate. It did not signal again. Across the tactical display, distant contacts, faint, newly resolved, adjusted vectors by fractions of a degree, so small they barely registered. The Empire dismissed the motion as noise. Weapons charge indicators climbed toward demonstration thresholds, clean and confident. The compliance clock hit 0 and disappeared, replaced by firing solutions. The Empire had been told no. It prepared with practiced certainty. To teach a lesson it believed it had mastered long ago. The first shots were meant to correct behavior, not end it. Imperial gunnery doctrine called for restraint when dealing with primitives and anomalies. 3 cruisers on the forward line fired. Coherent energy lances at 21,000 kilometers, output capped at 12%, frequencies tuned to overload any improvised shielding. The beams crossed the void in perfect alignment and struck the unknown ship squarely amidships. The command amphitheater waited for the expected sequence. Shield bloom, harmonic spike, catastrophic venting. None appeared. Energy impacted armor. Not a field. Not a lattice. Armor. Light spread across the hull's blunt plates and vanished into seams that Imperial analysts had dismissed as crude construction. Thermal spikes flared and flattened. Radiation bleed-through decayed below background. In 0.8 seconds, damage assessments populated the display and stalled at 0 confirmed penetrations. No damage. A second volley followed from 6 ships. Output raised to 28%. Frequencies staggered to induce resonance failure. The target disappeared inside, overlapping glare bright enough to cast shadows across nearby hulls. For 3.1 seconds, the unknown ship was nothing but light. When the glare cleared, its silhouette remained unchanged. Armor plates, had blackened. Some outer layers had ablated entirely, peeling away in controlled sheets that carried excess heat into vacuum. Beneath them, identical layers waited, intact and square to the threat. Internal temperatures peaked and dropped in regulated cycles. Power output remained stubbornly flat, a line too low to support any known defensive system. An analyst reported absorption efficiency at 90.9%. Another corrected it to 91.6% as more data arrived. A third updated the figure again. The number stabilized at 92.1 and refused to move. Murmurs spread, sharp and contained. Council models did not allow for that curve. Commanders escalated without ceremony. 12 cruisers fired at 45%. A battleship-class emitter joined at 60, violating peacetime tolerances. The impact washed the battle space in white-blue brilliance, saturating optics and forcing sensor dampening across the array. For a moment, even confidence dimmed. When the systems recovered, the ship was still there. Crew life signs registered for the first time, resolving through the interference. Stable, numerous, no spike indicating panic, no maneuver burn, no counterfire. The ship absorbed, vented, endured. Cavities between armor layers refracted energy laterally, bleeding it into heat sinks buried deep within the hull. Ports too recessed to target vented controlled plumes that sensors misclassified as debris. What the Empire had labeled inefficiency revealed itself as intention. They're still there. The words escaped a junior officer before discipline intervened. They were logged anyway. At 70% output, Imperial weapons began to injure themselves. Emitter housings overheated. Containment fields wavered. One cruiser dropped out of formation to vent plasma, its captain filing a damage report that listed target non-compliance as the primary anomaly. The presiding admiral ordered a pause to reconfigure firing solutions, irritation bleeding toward disbelief. During the lull, long-range sensors caught motion. The unknown ship's vector did not change, but distant contacts, previously dismissed as noise, resolved into structure. Dozens of faint signatures adjusted by fractions of a degree. Distances closed from 3.2 million kilometers to 2.9 without visible acceleration spikes. The unknown ship transmitted a single telemetry burst, unencrypted, narrowband, meant to be read. Impact graphs, absorption curves, a flat line annotated with a timestamp, efficiency acceptable. The phrase propagated through the amphitheater faster than any alarm. Imperial Command authorized one final demonstration volley at 85% to end the anomaly. As weapons charged, an elder strategist stared at the absorption curve. At the way, it flattened regardless of input, and felt something cold settle behind their eyes. If this was acceptable, they wondered, what had the ship been built to endure? Across the void, the unknown hull held course, armor steaming faintly, distances closing with patient certainty. The Empire had fired to make a point. Instead, it had proven one. They did not retreat when the next volley charged. They advanced. Imperial emitters surged toward 85% output, containment fields whining as safeties strained. The unknown ship took the fire squarely, armor venting heat in disciplined plumes. And then its drive signature changed. Not in a spike, in a slope. Acceleration climbed smoothly past thresholds. Imperial biology could not survive. 6G. 9. 1212. G sensors recalibrated twice before accepting the numbers. At that acceleration, Council doctrine predicted structural failure and crew liquefaction. The unknown ship closed from 21,000 kilometers to 16,500 in seconds, vector unwavering, profile unchanged. Crew life signs held flat. No alarms, no evasive. Jinx. It was not dodging fire, it was shortening the equation. Then the rest of the contacts resolved. What had been dismissed as noise sharpened into form. 67 human hulls distributed across the battle space, each entering its own acceleration. Ramp. Vectors diverged, crossed, recombined. None mirrored another. The pattern defied elegant arcs and shattered predictive models. Human ships slid through volumes of space Imperial doctrine marked unsafe, passing within tens of kilometers of Council, hulls with timing separated by fractions of a second. Distance counters began to fall. 15,000 kilometers. 12,400. 9:3800. Council captains ordered minor corrections to preserve formation symmetry. Those corrections collided with one another as human vectors occupied the space required to maneuver. Fire control solutions lagged. Targeting. Computers struggled to track acceleration profiles that did not peak or pulse, but held constant, relentless. At 12G, the humans did not outrun Imperial weapons. They outran Imperial assumptions, closing fast. A Council cruiser broke formation to create room and found a human destroyer already sliding into the vector it needed, relative velocity high enough to shear sensor vanes clean off. Another attempted to pivot and clipped an escort, the collision rippling outward as captains overcorrected to avoid secondary impacts. The battle space lost symmetry. What had been layered power became crowded volume. At 6,000 kilometers, the unknown ship cut thrust and pivoted broadside, bleeding velocity in a controlled burn that should have torn it apart. Inertial dampening held. Structural stress peaked and fell with intolerance. Imperial gunners fired where the ship had been, their beams carved empty vacuum as the hull settled into a posture that placed multiple command vessels inside, overlapping. Arcs. Human ships exploited the compression without haste. Every acceleration forced a reaction, every reaction stacked error. Orders from Imperial Command contradicted themselves, tighten ranks, spread out, hold arcs, and compliance with one. Instruction violated another. Space shrank further. At 4,200 kilometers, the humans crossed into ranges optimized for kinetic engagement, where Imperial energy coherence degraded and reaction windows collapsed below safe margins. Dark apertures irised open along the unknown, in ship's spine, unapologetic and numerous. Across the tactical display, Imperial command hulls found themselves bracketed by converging vectors they could no longer escape without tearing their own fleet apart. An elder strategist saw it then. Too late to matter. The humans were not collapsing the formation with fire. They were doing it with timing. At 3,000 kilometers, the numbers stabilized, the geometry locked. Imperial elegance broke under math it could not outrun. The unknown ship held position at E. The center of the compression, acceleration steady, cruise calm, the distance finally closed. The first command ship died before its crew understood the firing solution. Human fire control resolved the geometry without haste. Inside 3,000 kilometers, Imperial command vessels struggled to reorient, elegant hulls trapped by their own formations. The unknown ship, now unmistakably human, did not rush the moment. It waited for convergence. Vectors aligned, relative velocities flattened, probability bands collapsed. Then, its spinal railguns fired. There was no flash, no warning bloom. Only mass at velocity. 6 tungsten penetrators left the rails at a measured fraction of light speed, spaced 0.11 seconds apart to defeat predictive interception. Imperial sensors registered impacts before commanders understood weapons had discharged. The first rod punched through a command cruiser's forward hull, ignored superstructure, and exited through the core. The second followed the same path, with negligible deviation. Pressure collapsed, power failed, the ship split along stress lines it had never been designed to experience. 1. Missiles followed, not as a barrage but as arithmetic. Human destroyers released them in groups of 8, staggered by milliseconds, each with distinct guidance logic. Some burned hot, drawing defensive fire. Others coasted cold, invisible until terminal phase. Imperial point defenses tracked the loud signatures and reported success as interceptors detonated decoys. The quiet missiles arrived untouched. At 2,700 kilometers, a second command vessel attempted an emergency pivot, overcorrected under conflicting orders, and exposed its ventral plane. 3 railgun rounds arrived through that opening. A fourth followed milliseconds later, delayed by design to exploit the sudden pressure differential. The vessel's gravity ring sheared free and continued spinning, intact and useless, while the rest of the hull collapsed inward. Life signs dropped from 10,084 to 0 in under 4 seconds. 2. Imperial command channels fractured. Orders overlapped, and contradicted one another as admirals shouted for withdrawal corridors that no longer existed. Human ships occupied every viable vector of escape, holding position with calm precision. The third command vessel fired wildly, energy lances splashing across empty space, as gunners tried to force an opening through volume rather than geometry. A human cruiser answered with missiles carrying limited-yield nuclear charges. They detonated at calculated standoff distances, shaped and directional, tuned to crush sensor arrays and fracture internal structures without vaporizing the hull. The blast folded the command vessel inward, severing power and propulsion in the same instant. The ship went dark, drifting, structure mostly intact. Human targeting brackets vanished from its icon. Boarding transponders flickered once, then dimmed as fire control moved on. "We count before we fire." The phrase appeared briefly on an Imperial auxiliary channel, flagged for analysis. It was lost almost immediately beneath cascading error reports. Escort. Ships surged to screen remaining leadership hulls. Railgun fire did not saturate. It selected. Each shot removed a node that mattered: communications relays, coordination hubs, fleet anchors. Human gunners ignored ships that posed no immediate command function, allowing them to live long enough to understand the pattern forming around them. At 2,100 kilometers, a cluster of Imperial cruisers attempted a desperate mass ram against a human frigate, trading doctrine for momentum. The frigate adjusted thrust by 0.3 g, slid aside, and let the cruisers collide with one another. Sensors logged the impact as environmental hazard neutralization. No weapons were discharged. The battle clock crossed 24 minutes. Imperial command coherence fell below 40%. Fleet-wide orders degraded into local guesses and delayed reactions. Human losses remained unchanged. 0 destroyed hulls, 2 damaged, none mission killed. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. 52 railgun rounds expended, 23 confirmed kills, 3 command vessels erased, 1 disabled for capture. Human ships transmitted status updates openly. "Primary objectives achieved," read one. "Command neutralized." Some Imperial captains continued firing, weapons overheating as they tried to impose will through volume. Others powered down and broadcast surrender codes across every frequency they could access. Human systems acknowledged each automatically, marking surrendered hulls in green and excluding them from targeting solutions without exception. At 33 minutes, firing slowed. At 36, it stopped. Not because the Imperial fleet was gone, but because it no longer had a voice. What remained drifted in disordered clusters, leaderless, weapons cooling, damage reports cascading faster than anyone could read them. The unknown ship held position at the center of the wreckage, railguns silent, missiles cold. Command had not been defeated by chaos or courage. It had vanished under counting. The guns fell silent by decision, not depletion. At 36 minutes and 12 seconds, every human firing solution cleared simultaneously. Rail capacitors bled charge into sinks, missile bays sealed across the fractured. Battle space, Imperial crews waited for the next calculation and did not receive it. Instead, a transmission propagated outward from the unknown ship, now openly identified as human, broad spectrum, unencrypted, riding military and civilian relays until it spilled beyond the system. The image was spare. A human officer, framed. Identically to the first exchange, posture unchanged. No victory marks, no threat cadence. "This engagement is paused," they said. "Hostile fire has ceased." Imperial commanders braced for annihilation terms. None came. "We are broadcasting." "Under interstellar law," the officer continued. Data panes unfolded beside them, stark and readable. Definitions rendered cleanly. Thresholds highlighted. First, the practice of chattel slavery is prohibited, effective immediately. Any vessel or installation engaged in the transport, processing, or ownership of sentient beings is designated a criminal enterprise. Across Imperial hulls, internal alarms triggered. Registry codes lit red. Cargo holds that had never appeared on tactical displays now pulsed with warning overlays. Labor manifests auto-flagged. Some captains stared at their own ships as if seeing them for the first time. "Second," the officer said, "surrender is protected. Any ship that powers down offensive systems, transmits standard distress and surrender codes, and holds position will not be fired upon. Boarding will be conducted only to secure weapons and render aid. We do not kill prisoners, the line propagated. Without emphasis, and was enforced immediately. As more Imperial ships powered down, their icons turned green. Human targeting brackets vanished without delay, even when green hulls drifted through optimal firing geometry. No exceptions registered. Third, the officer said, there will be trials. The word landed harder than any weapon. Command authority does not exempt individuals from accountability. Evidence has been recorded. Jurisdiction will be asserted. Sentences will be imposed by courts, not fleets. An Imperial legal attaché attempted interruption, citing sovereignty and ancient accords. The transmission did not pause. Sovereignty does not extend to enslavement, the officer replied. Accords that permit it are void. Numbers scrolled beneath the image, calm and unavoidable. Enslaved populations flagged for liberation, 6.1 million. Vessels designated for seizure, 347. Command personnel detained pending trial, 203. Humanitarian transfer window, 72 hours. Human ships moved again, not toward targets, but toward survivors. Boarding craft launched in measured numbers, medics visible. Through viewports, weapon safeties engaged. Damage control drones swarmed crippled Imperial hulls to stabilize atmospheres and prevent cascading failures. A human frigate adjusted thrust by fractions of a degree to shield a powerless cruiser from drifting debris, accepting superficial hull damage to prevent further loss of life. This is restraint. The officer concluded without flourish. You mistook our silence for permission, they said. This ends now. The channel closed. In the quiet that followed, weapons cooled and surrender codes multiplied. Green markers spread across the display. The engagement had not ended because humanity was finished, but because it had decided the killing was no longer required. The unknown ship held station amid the wreckage, scarred and intact, as law replaced fire, and the conflict moved, deliberately and irrevocably, into its next phase. The explanation did not come from the humans. It surfaced through coalition channels as analysts compared what they had witnessed with archives most governments treated as academic residue. Human fleet movements were replayed at reduced speed. Acceleration curves overlaid with navigation data, pulled from probe networks that predated the Empire's first expansion. The patterns aligned too cleanly to ignore. This had not been a response. It had been a posture. Coalition tacticians noted that the unknown ship's initial vector matched a corridor mapped, abandoned, and quietly remapped over centuries of survey traffic. The dispersion of 67 human hulls across millions of kilometers was not disorder or hesitation. It was a lattice, pre-computed to cover every viable approach and retreat vector an Imperial fleet would logically attempt. They were already in position, a coalition analyst said, and no one challenged it. Long-range sensors confirmed the suspicion. Beneath civilian traffic and background radiation, dormant infrastructure signatures surfaced as identification thresholds were lowered. Fuel depots embedded in cometary bodies. Ammunition caches hollowed into dead moons. Maintenance docks disguised as research platforms and listening posts. Carbon dating on the oldest installations forced recalibration twice before acceptance, over 2 centuries. Some nodes appeared older still, upgraded rather than replaced. This was foreseen. The phrase moved quietly through coalition diplomatic nets, never broadcast toward Imperial survivors. This knowledge was not a weapon. It was a warning meant for those who still believed neutrality could last forever. Fragments of human doctrine, long dismissed as alarmist theory, suddenly matched reality. Kinetic weapons were not archaic, they were resilient. Slugs could be fabricated anywhere, armor could be repaired without exotic fields. Crews could be trained under constant stress, conditioned to operate at sustained acceleration levels most coalition physiologies could not survive. Humanity had optimized for wars that lasted decades, not engagements measured in minutes. A coalition historian surfaced a sealed incident report from more than a century earlier. a border system that vanished from Imperial records within a generation. At the time, the loss had been attributed to piracy or stellar instability. Sensor fragments recovered now bore uncomfortable similarities to the signatures recorded in this battle. "They've been enforcing boundaries quietly," someone said, "long before anyone noticed." The implications settled heavily. Humanity had not hidden its strength. It had curated its exposure, allowing the Empire to expand until it crossed lines drawn in private doctrine and reinforced through silent drills. The law broadcast had not been improvised under fire. It was procedural, refined through simulations that assumed exterminator-scale threats and moral failure as constants. Coalition probability trees updated and collapsed into narrow bands. No branch showed humanity losing without rewriting physics. Even escalation scenarios ended the same way. Not in mutual annihilation, but in controlled dismantling, followed by administration. Human fleets were positioned not just for this system, but for the next set of choke points the Empire would logically attempt to consolidate. Encrypted messages began moving between coalition capitals. Treaties signed under fear were flagged for review. Defense clauses were rewritten to mirror human language, not out of admiration, but necessity. In the wreckage of Imperial command, survivors struggled to understand how defeat had arrived so completely. In coalition space, the realization was colder and clearer. This battle had not revealed human power. It had revealed that humanity had been waiting for the galaxy to catch up. Neutralization began without announcement. Human command reclassified every remaining Imperial hull into 3 states: hostile, surrendered, undecided, and acted only on the first. The distinction was absolute. Green markers were ignored even when they drifted across optimal firing lanes. Red markers received no further warnings. Missile bays opened across the human lattice. This time there was no arithmetic restraint. Waves launched in disciplined silence, hundreds of signatures blooming and vanishing as guidance shifted between hot burn and cold coast. The missiles did not converge on a single point. They flowed, dividing and recombining, filling volumes of space Imperial doctrine had never treated as lethal simultaneously. Point defenses reacted by habit and failed by sequence. Interceptors chased decoys, while real warheads slid through blind arcs created by earlier collisions and panicked maneuvering. At 6,400 kilometers, an Imperial cruiser died with engines firing, torn open by kinetic impact and internal overpressure. In 5E900, another lost power and rolled helplessly, its surrender code broadcasting seconds too late to cancel inbound fire already committed by logic gates that did not bargain. Human command logged the losses and adjusted nothing. The cascade spread. Imperial captains fought isolation rather than an enemy. With command coherence already broken, each hull made its own calculation under pressure. Some powered down immediately, broadcasting surrender across every band. Human systems acknowledged them within milliseconds, icons flipping green as missiles peeled away mid-course and retargeted without hesitation. Others hesitated, waiting for orders that would never arrive. Those ships remained red, and the missile flow did not divert. "Do not fire on green." The directive pulsed continuously through human channels, enforced by code and supervision alike. It held even when green hulls drifted into firing geometry against active threats. Gunners adjusted, sacrificing efficiency to preserve principle. The choice slowed neutralization by measurable minutes. No one objected. Boarding followed behind the missile waves like a second tide. Human cutters approached disabled hulls at controlled relative velocities, grappling points locking with mechanical certainty. Breach teams moved in pairs, weapons slung low, medics centered between them. Compartments were sealed before being cleared. Atmospheres were stabilized before prisoners were moved. Where resistance appeared, it was brief and contained. Human teams vented sections, waited, and advanced only when gravity and oxygen had done the work. At 23 minutes into the phase, an Imperial carrier attempted a mass launch, dumping strike craft in a final bid to overwhelm defenses. Human response was precise and impersonal. Point defense grids engaged not to annihilate, but to shape. Non-lethal electromagnetic pulses collapsed guidance systems, herding fighters into narrowing cones where engines flamed out and pilots lost control. Hundreds of craft tumbled powerless, intact, crews alive. Recovery beacons activated automatically. Surrender. Cascade.Coalition observers flagged it as a phenomenon rather than a tactic. Once a critical mass of Imperial ships powered down and survived, the rest followed. Crews watched neighboring hulls go green and remain intact. The lesson traveled faster than fear. At 41 minutes, surrendered vessels outnumbered hostile ones, 3-1. At 54, 5-1. The last organized resistance formed around a crippled logistics tender shielded by a ring of heavy cruisers acting on something like loyalty. Human analysis flagged the maneuver as emotional rather than tactical. Missile fire softened the ring without collapsing it. Railgun shots punched precise holes through power cores and command sections. The tender was disabled without rupture. Boarding teams secured it and immediately began evacuating non-combatants, their presence visible across multiple feeds. Throughout the phase, the human flagship held central position, anchoring the geometry. Railguns fired sparingly now, each discharge deliberate, removing ships that threatened to destabilize the surrender perimeter. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns, missiles expended 326, railgun rounds 24 additional, nuclear charges 0 during this phase. Human losses remained unchanged. No destroyed hulls, 2 damaged, none mission killed. At 72 minutes, the final hostile icon blinked and turned green. The battle space did not erupt. It simply exhaled. Hundreds of Imperial hulls drifted in ordered clusters, weapons cold, crews waiting. Human ships moved among them like custodians, dispatching repair drones, establishing traffic lanes, preventing collisions that would have killed ships no longer fighting. Boarding counts stabilized, prisoners secured. 6.0 million, injured, treated, 468,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last red marker disappeared. An Imperial officer aboard a surrendered cruiser watched a human frigate adjust thrust to shield their hull from drifting debris and felt the fight drain away completely. Not fear, not relief, recognition. The Imperial fleet had not been annihilated. It had been dismantled, decision by decision, vector by vector, until resistance no longer made sense. Human command logged the phase complete and shifted focus to humanitarian transfer and legal processing. Violence ended without celebration, replaced by administration carried out with the same calm precision that had broken the fleet. Mercy followed procedure. Human cutters docked with surrendered hulls according to a queue that ignored rank and favored urgency. Atmospheres were stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured Imperial crew were triaged without comment, species tags flashing briefly before folding into the same priority schema. Pain control was administered. Fractures were set. Bleeding stopped. The process moved with practiced speed and conspicuous indifference to uniform color or crest. No reprisals. The directive propagated with the same authority as a firing order. Human Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low, restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and transferred without spectacle. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony, command lineage, streamed into a legal framework already live and accepting inputs. Temporary detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Food was issued to calculated dietary requirements, down to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in neutral tones, repeating as often as necessary. Prisoner counts stabilized at 6.0 million. Fatalities did not increase, the numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like promises they intended to keep. Across the system, civilian traffic resumed under human advisories. Relief convoys arrived, on pre-cleared vectors, bearing markings from worlds that had never openly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched the manifests populate and recognized the pattern immediately. Neighboring systems were not waiting for invitations. They were defecting. Declarations arrived in disciplined waves. suspension of imperial tribute, opening of ports to human oversight, requests for arbitration under the statutes broadcast during the battle. Political gravity shifted not with speeches, but with filings. Authority drained through procedure faster than it ever had through force. We choose this law. The phrase appeared verbatim across multiple declarations, identical wording traced to the law broadcast template. Analysts flagged mimetic adoption. Human Command logged it without comment. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding action concluded. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity: enslavement, unlawful processing, command responsibility. Evidence hashes linked directly to sensor logs and sworn testimony collected in real time. Command personnel flagged earlier, 203. Individuals were separated and transferred under guard that neither tightened at insults nor softened at pleas. The guards had heard both before. A former imperial governor attempted to negotiate conditional alignment in exchange for amnesty. The response came from a human legal officer, not a commander. Alignment does not negate criminal liability, they said. The channel closed. Inside the detention habitats, rumors spread faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed surrender had worked exactly as promised. They noticed no one had been spaced, no compartments flooded, no reprisals. Taken for panic or defiance, shouted too late to matter. The lesson settled unevenly, but it settled. At 84 hours, the first liberated populations were transferred off seized vessels. Families emerged into gravity they had not chosen, blinking under lighting calibrated for comfort rather than efficiency. Human medics stepped aside as civilian agencies took over, their task complete. The human flagship remained on station, scarred armor patched with clean plates that did not hide the damage. Its commander filed a concise operational note. Force, he replied. Compliance achieved, mercy sustained. Beyond the system, leaders watched data replace doctrine and made decisions quietly. Humanity had not seized territory. It had offered an order and demonstrated with meticulous restraint what followed when that order was chosen. The quiet that followed felt engineered. Debris fields settled into predictable orbits. Traffic lanes reopened under human advisories. Trial schedules propagated through secure channels with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the system looked orderly again, as if violence had been a brief interruption rather than a decisive act. Human sensors did not relax. Deep-range arrays continued to sweep beyond the vanishing point. Baselines stretched across millions of kilometers, listening for patterns that did not belong. In 118 hours post-engagement, one array returned a result that failed initial classification. Not a ship, not a fleet. A pressure in space-time that suggested motion without conventional drives, persistence without emissions. Analysts reran the data. The anomaly held. The source lay beyond the outer rim, past mapped jump corridors, at a distance measured in excess of 40,000 AU. It advanced on a vector that ignored gravitational logic, mass estimates fluctuating as if the object rejected, being measured. Emission fragments matched restricted archival signatures. Records pulled from pre-imperial histories of systems erased so completely their names survived only as footnotes. Exterminator signature. The designation propagated through human command without alarms or raised voices. Planning cells activated that had existed long before first contact with the Empire. Timelines populated, contingency headers unlocked. The numbers were not comforting, but they were familiar. A coalition observer, cleared under emergency protocols, asked a single question over an encrypted channel. Is this because of what just happened? The reply came after a pause measured in milliseconds. No, the human officer said. This would have come regardless. Meaning the Empire had never been the final problem. Meaning the battle just concluded had not exhausted preparation. It had revealed it. The human flagship adjusted station by a fraction of a degree, aligning long-range sensors with the approaching anomaly. Around it, other human hulls mirrored, the movement without instruction. Geometry, settling into configurations older than imperial star charts. Ammunition tallies updated quietly. Training rotations shifted.